Hey, everybody, we're going to let folks sort of trickle in here. And as we allow Zoom to let everybody in, which usually takes a minute or two, if you want to, please feel free to leave what city and state or country that you're dialing in from in the chat. We'd love to see who's dialing in and also where everybody is coming from. And hopefully people have better weather than Boston. Hey, Erica, good to see you. Texas, love it. Utah. Oh, you guys, I think have been getting a ton of snow, which is amazing. Bay Area, Alexandria, Virginia, New York City. Awesome. Hey, Elizabeth. Hey, Glenn. Hey, Becca. Black Creek. Awesome. Fort Worth, Texas. All right, we'll give it another 30 seconds to let people into Zoom. Hey, Kurt. All right, another Boston person. Houston, Texas. Amazing. All righty. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to give sort of a quick overview here. We'll do some introductions. We'll do a quick poll to kick things off, and then we'll just sort of jump into the content because I know that's what everybody's here for. Today, we're going to be diving into a really important conversation for HR professionals, really anybody, whether you're a consultant, you work for a company, you're looking for your next job, and it's really how to build and leverage your HR/PeopleOps network. And whether it's in-person events, online communities, we're going to discuss how to engage more meaningfully without it feeling transactional, like networking. I feel like networking is sort of a dirty word a little bit, at least in many circles. I know I've been talking to my wife about networking. She's a lawyer, and in the legal world, it's like, oh, networking. I'm an MBA, and it's a little bit different. We're like, yeah, let's network. I went to a party last week, a kid's birthday party, and I ended up exchanging phone numbers with some guy. And that's just normal to me, but it can feel a little bit icky. And we're gonna talk about how to make it more authentic, mistakes to avoid, how to create relationships that really support your career. We've got two amazing panelists. I'm going to do a quick introduction on myself and then jump into their bios. The one thing that I'll ask is if you can please hold off on sharing your LinkedIn URLs until a little bit later, because we're actually going to have a dedicated networking power hour in about 35 minutes. And so that's going to be the best time to share your LinkedIn profiles. And that's just kind of a really fast-paced, better way to do it than kind of trickling it out. If we haven't met before, my name is Phil Strazula. I'm the founder of Select Software Reviews, and our mission is to help HR professionals to find and buy the right HR technology. Every month, around 100,000 companies use our reviews to figure out what HRIS, ATS, et cetera, to buy. And we also have an advisor solution where if you don't want to read a 25,000 word buyer guide about payroll software, you can talk to somebody on our staff and they'll give you bespoke recommendations. And as you can see from the slide here, we actually have a really good giveaway that we're doing for anybody on this webinar, where if you book a time with one of our advisors, then we will give you a gift card so you can take somebody out for coffee and grow your HR network. And I'll put a link into that in the chat right now if you want to book that and get that gift card. Again, this is for people who are looking for HR software advice. You're buying an HRIS, ATS, et cetera, and want to take advantage of that. Let me get into the introductions here. So Catherine is the vice president of HR community at HR Tech, which is an amazing event. If anybody hasn't gone to HR Tech, I highly recommend it. I've probably been at least 6 or 7 times, and it's sort of by far one of the best conferences that I've been to, period, let alone focused on this HR community. She's an accomplished executive with 2 decades of experience, and she brings a wealth of knowledge in both leveraging in-person and online networks to build meaningful and impactful communities. Krista joins us from the Talent Collective, where she's the co-founder. And the Talent Collective is a thriving community for women in talent acquisition field. She's passionate about recruiting, and she works with a select number of clients to ensure she stays connected to the HR and recruiting community. And I was actually at the Transform conference this week in Las Vegas and have heard amazing things about Talent Collective as well as HR Tech while there. It's hard to escape either of these brands within our ecosystem. And so I'm super grateful that we have both of you here to talk about this really, really important topic. A little bit of housekeeping. So this session will be recorded, and it is worth one HRCI and or SHRM credit. So if you are on here for that, just check your email afterwards, and we will get you everything you need to get that credit taken care of. And the other thing I'm going to say is we like to keep these sessions fairly interactive. I think it's awesome when the chat is sort of going throughout with questions, with people sharing their own insights. We're going to talk about different tactics, different places to network, and we'd love to hear from all of you throughout. Before we get started, I want to launch a poll just so we can kind of tailor the conversation and see where people are at. And the poll is really to understand what are people doing right now to build their personal networks, especially their professional networks within the HR community. So take a second, answer that poll. And while that happens, Krista, I don't know if, would you mind just kind of sharing more about the Talent Collective and the work that you all do there?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So, as Phil mentioned, thanks, Phil, for that introduction. I am co-founder of Talent Collective. So we are a community for women in the talent acquisition space. We were founded right about 2 years ago. My background is I have over 15 years in TA specifically, a little in HR as well. You know, the two functions definitely coexist and collaborate a ton. But really, a couple of years ago, was getting together with a few other women in our space and just talking about all of the challenges that are going on, all these crises that are going on in the talent acquisition world, a lot of the layoffs that have been happening, you know, is AI coming to take all of our jobs? And we wanted to create a space for women to come together and talk about these things and be able to connect with each other. You know, our kind of ethos is we're all better when we're together, and it's all about women supporting other women in our space. We noticed that there's so many amazing HR groups out there, and TA always is kind of like a subsect of those conversations, or just, you know, one piece of it. And so we wanted to create a space where TA was really at the forefront, and we could bring in experts and thought leaders and all of the technology that people have so many questions about in our space. So we created Talent Collective, and here we are almost 2 years later. We have over 600 members globally now, mostly in the US, but we also are starting to get some members in Europe, and quite a few actually in Canada and all over the world. So that's a little bit about us. So we have a lot of different programming options for our members, from mentorship programs to mastermind peer groups. We do a lot of amazing webinars just like this as well. So, you know, again, bringing in thought leaders in our space, and doing more intimate workshops and stuff like that too. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I want to kind of dive into it. And Catherine, I'm super curious to get your perspective on in-person events. And, you know, we're on these Zoom calls a lot, especially now that many of us work remotely. And what do you think is different about meeting up in person?
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate you having me. And it's good to be on this panel with Krista as well. So, I mean, I'm here representing pretty much live events. I've been in the event space for more than 20 years, like you said in the introduction. And I think there is an amazing amount of value with in-person events, specifically about making, and I would say, authentic connections. That's sort of key. Strong engagements with people, face to face is always very important within networking space. Obviously, at events, you have these like casual moments and encounters, serendipitous kind of moments where you see a member of your network that you haven't seen in a few years. And that's sort of like the casual encounters that you have at events. But you also have some really structured encounters at events. And those are through, conference, like very specific conferences, specific roundtables, or very specific topics within events. But, we do a lot of the stuff online, which is super important. But I think, the one-to-one sort of interaction with people is just critical when it comes to networking.
I totally agree. And by the way, before I forget, the poll results came back. It looks like a lot of folks are predominantly networking through online events or groups. And I'm curious, put in the chat, what groups are you a part of? What have you found to be really valuable? Specific groups as well as just like what about them really resonates with you? Catherine, going back to these more structured in-person conferences. What advice do you have for somebody before they go out to an HR tech where I think there's something like 10,000 people that go or something like that. And maybe you have like an app that, has the attendees, like, are you, DMing people beforehand? How do you just sort of prep to make sure I'm going to make the most of these 2 to 3 days where I'm here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead. You have to prepare for events. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a 10,000 person event or a 100-person small conference. You really have to spend the time prior to the event preparing, find out who's going to be there, look at the session schedule. What does the calendar, what does the general schedule look like? A lot of events these days have mobile apps. And a lot of them have matchmaking capabilities, networking capabilities that you can utilize prior to going to the event. It's something that we have been focusing quite a bit for our event this coming year. We're going to launch a new app which has, the matchmaking capability. So typically that would be released about a couple of weeks before the event and allows attendees as well as the vendor community to really interact and set appointments prior to coming to the show. So, I think that is just absolutely key in terms of going to the event because frankly, sometimes you go to these very large events like HR Tech and it could be a bit overwhelming. So again, preparing and really setting a somewhat, a schedule for yourself so that you have an understanding of what your day looks like.
Open question for either of you, or maybe even both. What should my goals be in building my network? Is it knowledge transfer? Is it my next job? Am I building relationships just with other HR professionals? Is it vendors? Is it others in the ecosystem? What sort of goals should I have in mind when I start to build my network?
I would say all the above. I mean, it really is an individual thing, Krista, jump in. But really, it's what you want to take away from the event. If you're looking for an opportunity or your next step within your career, then that mindset is there to get to the event. So again, when I talk about planning, when you're doing your networking, you have that in mind. But it could be various reasons that you go to an event. It could be sourcing your product. In that case, you would take a look at the vendor community and who's there, create a sort of short list of vendors that you want to get in front of and create those appointments or have that outreach, have that short list. Again, going back to the whole planning thing, but there is no one answer to everyone. It just depends on what your goals are.
Yeah, and completely agree. I think the only thing I would add to that is don't just network when you need something, right? I can't tell you how many people I talk to, women in our community, but outside of that as well, that when they have a full-time job, they're very heads down, very busy, and, kind of have this excuse, and rightfully so, but I'm too busy to network. I'm too busy to go to events or to join a group or to be active in this Slack channel, etc. And then, when they do get to the point of, oh my gosh, I just got laid off, or, I'm needed to move with my spouse's job across the country and have to leave, like whatever the case may be, you kind of pop your head up and go, uh-oh, I haven't done this in a few years, right? And so again, I can't tell you how many people I talk to that say that's a huge regret of theirs, is not networking when they have a full-time job, or maybe you're a consultant and you have a full client list already. And so I would just encourage people to make the time for it. It has to be a priority, or else when you really do need it, you feel behind already.
I completely agree. I probably in my own life dedicate 5 to 10%, maybe 5% of my week to sort of like networking. And that could be somebody introduces me to somebody who is totally irrelevant to what I'm doing, that wants career help or some other form of advice, or I can help them out in some other way. And it's like, yeah, I'll talk to you for sure. Like, let me help you out. Or it could be reaching out to somebody in my sort of ecosystem that maybe there's not something directly to be done right now, but maybe in the future there will be. And it's just like, hey, no agenda. Let's just have a relationship here. I'm wondering, well, first of all, I should mention one other sort of goal of networking that I think is totally valid is commiserating. And I know at the event that I went to this week, there was a lot of just, I'm a team of one at my company, and here are all the things that are super annoying about the way that our C-suite does things, or employees, or our payroll vendor, or whatever the case may be. And I think that that's really valuable because burnout is real, especially in the HR function. I think the stats are sort of mind-boggling, actually. Here's another question for you. Let's say I'm going HR tech, or I'm joining Talent Collective, and I see there's a member that seems unobtainable. CHRO of Pepsi is going, and I would really love to. I'm working at a CPG company too, and I want to understand blah, blah, blah. Should I shoot my shot on that and reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in chatting with you for XYZ reasons, but understand that you're busy. Is there any way I could fit in your schedule, or is there a better way to approach, or should I kind of more stay within my, I don't know, lane a little bit more? Maybe CHR of Pepsi is just like, maybe next time.
I'm a shoot your shot kind of person. If you
Yeah,
don't
same.
ask, yeah, you're never gonna get an opportunity if you don't ask, right? The worst they can say is no, and or they don't respond, and that's fine. But you're not gonna get that opportunity if you don't ask. And I'm just surprised that more people don't reach out and make the ask, right? Like, you'd be
Yeah.
surprised how open C-suite people are to having a conversation, right? Like, they oftentimes want to give back, and they want to be able to share their expertise or mentor someone, and they're not given opportunities because nobody's asking, right? So I'm a huge fan of just making the ask.
Same, Krista. I'm in your team. I mean, that's why they're there. Honestly, at a C-suite or director level or manager level, they're at an event to network and do the same thing you're doing. So you would be surprised how receptive they are to, especially when you're asking questions. I think that's one of the later on when we talk about some things that perhaps people don't do is ask questions. Be curious,
Mm.
and people are very open to answering them, or at least stating their opinion. So just having that door opened, I think you'd be surprised how many people would want to interact with you.
Another tip I've found is to really be super curious about somebody else's path. Why did you do the things you did? How did you get to become the CHRO of Pepsi? And you're 100% right. People, you'll be shocked by who will respond to you. I had a conversation somewhat recently with one of the most successful investors in the world, multi-billionaire, because I read his book and I emailed him and I said, hey, I would love to learn from you and let's get dinner together. And he said, sure, let's do it. And I was like, that's kind of crazy, right? This is somebody who's
Yeah.
like on TV all the time, and and has buildings named after him and things like that. And so you just, some guy on the internet can email him and get a meeting. So
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit towards online communities. And Krista, maybe you could give us some insights here, and specifically how some of these communities can give you access to some of these, top industry minds, people who have this amazing knowledge that can really help propel you in your career.
Yeah, well, I guess first off, there's a lot of different types of online communities. There's Slack groups, there's LinkedIn groups, there's communities like Talent Collective where, it's more of a membership community and there might be like actual virtual events within that community. One of my biggest tips for any kind of online community, especially if you are trying to access, some of those top minds, is you have to be engaged, right? Like, I can't tell you how many like Slack groups I'm in where, if you ask a question, it's crickets. People aren't responding. And that the whole purpose is to, give you access to knowledge and connections that you didn't necessarily have before. So I think one thing that could really help is really carving out, even if it's 30 minutes of your calendar every week. And Phil, you mentioned like 5% of your time every week, maybe, devoting to networking in one capacity or another, but whatever communities you're in online, devoting a little bit of time every week to just go in, see what questions have been asked that week, see if you can contribute. If you have a question, throw it in there, but that engagement is really the only way you're going to receive anything of value, right? Otherwise, it's just a dormant community that people are sitting in, but there's no real value there.
Give and take. I
Yes.
know, Krista, you've used the term asynchronous networking. Is that basically, I've got a question, somebody else is answering it, and basically having this discussion like in a forum where, now this is institutional knowledge for the rest of the folks in the community?
Exactly. Yeah. And you can think of like a Slack community or within Talent Collective, we have like a chat room that's Ask the Community. You can put any kind of question in there. Asynchronous usually refers to not being in a virtual Zoom of some kind or in person. So it would be more of like a chat type of function.
Okay, got it. And Dwitty Meta asks, how do we access such Slack groups? We're gonna have a takeaways doc that we'll post in a little bit. Krista did post, or somebody posted earlier about Talent Collective, and we'll definitely put that in the chat as well. But we'll share access to some of those, and it looks like a lot of folks are in a lot of SHRM chapters. Actually, it looks like are pretty impactful. Oh, thanks Frida for posting Talent Collective. Yeah, there's a lot of groups here, so we'll sort of aggregate a list together for folks in that takeaways doc.
Yeah, and just quick tip, like something I did when I was looking to network more and get a part of groups, like I literally just Googled what are the top 10 HR communities, and I was looking for more recruiting based ones. And you can throw in there Slack based communities, etc., and you can get great lists that way. But I'm sure Phil will be able to send something out too.
How do you stay focused? Because there are hundreds of these groups out there. There are also, when you think about the in-person worlds, you've got the big shows, and then you've got probably every day there's a show, whether it's a meetup in Boston or a local SHRM chapter or whatever the case may be, a breakfast. How do you stay focused?
Yeah, I'll chime in here too. And Catherine, curious to hear your perspective. I would say don't overcommit and don't join too many groups, right? Like keep it small to start, maybe join 1 to 2 groups, really commit to those and trying to be really engaged in those to start. And then decide after a month or so if it's not the right one for you, and then you can move on to another one. But if you join too many at once, it is going to get very noisy, very overwhelming, too many options, right? And I would even say a learning curve that we went through at Talent Collective was I wanted to provide so much value to our members that I probably scheduled 2 to 3 like workshops and webinars every single week, but it was just way too much for people, right? And I was thinking, well, there's more value, but too many options. It was like information overload for people. So Really just try to select, one or two groups to start and then attend the things that they're offering. Oftentimes they are going to have some kind of Zoom meetup or, speed networking, or a lot of our workshops are really small. So there's breakout rooms and you can really get to know people that way. But yeah, start small.
I couldn't agree with you more, Krista. Absolutely. I think there are a lot of options out there, whether it be live events or online forums, et cetera. Sometimes it comes down to budget too. I mean, frankly, some of these events could be costly, travel, hotel, et cetera. So that will also weigh into your decision. So really prioritizing, I would say, what's the most important for you, or what your outcome, what's your desired outcome in terms of events or online forums. But agree that it can be overwhelming. So I think, being a little bit more organized, create a list of priorities will help you sort of, stay focused, like you asked, Phil.
One thing I'd love to ask the people on the phone to put in the chat, if you don't mind, is one thing that's kind of been the most impactful about networking for you, and specifically networking groups, whether that's online or offline. And also one thing that maybe has been lacking. I know we have a question that somebody RSVP'd with around SHRM feeling very outdated. And I know that a lot of people put in the chat their SHRM local chapter is sort of like their go-to. And your local chapter is much different than SHRM national. But I am just kind of curious what value people are getting at right now, and what value maybe they wish they were getting out of their current set of networking activities. And Catherine, you bring up a really good point, which is some of these things are not free. And I'm wondering how do I articulate to either myself if I'm paying out of pocket, and maybe it's my significant other or my boss, because hopefully they're going to cover it, to go to one of these events to shell out the money. And is there like a starter budget? Is it, $3,000? Is it, kind of where do I have to be ballpark wise?
I mean, every event is priced slightly different. Again, it depends on, what they offer. I can only speak specifically on my event, specifically for the HR Tech Las Vegas that's coming up in September. We do have various price points. You can come to the event and just, visit the exhibit hall area. The good thing about that is that it's at a lower cost. So there is a bigger price point for the full conference pass. But what we've done a lot this year is really made a conscious effort to have more content on the show floor, more access to speakers. We do things like Ask the Experts, which is just an area on the show floor where you can engage with HR leaders. It's part of your pass. It's a low entry point, but it still gives you the opportunity to have those networking times with very affluent people in the industry. And then it allows you also to get some content on the show floor if budgets don't allow for it. But, if you do want to create a case for your immediate supervisor or your boss, your CEO, whoever it is, or your spouse to come to the event, again, I would recommend, going back to basics. What is it that you're hoping to come out with the event? What are your goals? And then really outline what it is that the event has to get you to those goals and how that affects your outcome. So I think all that into consideration would make the decision whether you go or not to event. But again, a lot of events have different options. There's typically menus, entry point, full conference, et cetera. You can get VIP type treatments to some events. So there's various options.
One thing
And
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, a couple chats up, we do have a link to the HR Tech conference with a discount code, because I think the registration just opened and you sort of get the early bird rate plus a discount code. So if you're thinking about going, I would click that, save the discount code, and get the budget approval from your boss and get out there. Because I was actually just looking at my notes from the 2016 conference, which I think is the first HR Tech that I went to today, because I sort of have like conference best practices, and I was updating it because I went to this event this week around, what do you bring for water down to like, what do you wear and how do you network and how do you reach out and just make it an impactful couple of days. So I was iterating on those notes, looking at the 2016 and some of the interesting things that it brought back were one, there's the content, there's the exhibit floor, and then there's all this other stuff that happens around this ecosystem. There's parties, there's stuff that there's dinners you get invited to, there's people that you meet in the hallway that you're still friends with years later that you've done business with or you got a job from, et cetera. And it's hard to overstate when you get that concentration of people together in one place, how valuable it can be to your business and also to your own individual career too. So I would just encourage folks, if you're thinking about going to one of these big events this year, to really take a very hard look at the HR Tech Conference.
Mhm.
Krista, sorry I cut you off.
Yeah, no, one thing I'd just add to that is, like, for example, Talent Collective is, there's a membership cost to it, and a lot of our members that are employed have their employer covering it for like a professional development expense. And we actually have a letter, like a, proposed language that you can copy and paste and send to your boss or HR or whoever's approving the L&D budget, that outlines the value that you'd receive. So that's one thing, whatever, you're looking for in whether it's an event or a community, maybe reaching out and asking them, do you have some content I can use to justify this cost to my employer? And then second, if you're unemployed, asking for a scholarship. I mean, again, it's like, what's the worst that could happen? They're going to say no, right? We're big advocates on, we're not going to let costs stand in the way of someone joining our community. So if any woman is or underemployed, reach out, get the scholarship, so I would say just make the ask if it's something that is, completely out of reach too.
That's awesome. And we'll be sure to link to that in the takeaways doc as well, which we'll share after this so that everybody has access to that. I did just want to take a short break. I mentioned previously that the work that I do a lot with the HR community is helping people find and buy the right HR technology. And we do have this giveaway where if you are in the market for an HRIS, an ATS, an EOR, a PEO, a performance management system, element, like all this stuff, then and you want to get some advice from an advisor, it's totally free. We have a 4.9 out of 5-star rating from the HR teams that we help. And we do have this voucher where we'll basically send you a gift card. You can use it to get coffee with somebody in your network or to build your network, or you can really use it for whatever you'd like, to be honest with you. But I'll put a link into the chat now if you want to book a call with one of our advisors. You connect with us, we'll give you tailored recommendations, what HRIS to buy, ATS, et cetera. And then if you've got questions about your pricing, your contract, your CFO giving you a hard time, whatever, we can help with that. We've got lots of good testimonials about this. Again, we have like a 4.98 star rating or something crazy like that. Basically, everybody loves it, and it's totally free. So definitely help you out. And we do have that $60 voucher. Just book through that link that I shared in the chat. So, and I'm sorry. The other thing too is if you are a consultant and you want to join our referral program, I'm also going to put a link to that in the chat as well. If you're working across multiple companies that might need this sort of help, or you have a large network of people that might need this sort of help, join our referral program. We'd love to have you in there as well. I want to kind of transition the conversation a little bit to just how do you build more meaningful conversation or relationships? I think that there's the initial sort of connection that you can make at an event or through a community. And how do you just continue to feed that fire and build it long term so that 3 years from now, if you're looking for a new job, that's somebody that you can call and you can rely on, or if you need help in the interim, that's somebody that you can rely on. And I didn't know if either of you had any recommendations on how do you take that initial spark and turn it into something that is long lasting.
Well, Krista said something that was really poignant earlier with regards to continuously networking, even when you don't need to be networking or when you don't have an immediate need. So I think
Mhm.
to answer your question on that, to continue the conversation is just that, have those continuous touch points after the meeting. So one of the things that I like to do, and I've done this for a very long time. Anytime I meet someone at an event, we use LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is the business social media tool that most people use. I immediately link with them with a quick message as to how I met them or something that reminds me or reminds them of how they've met me. It seems very small and really unimportant at the time, but it does two things, right? It reminds you because sometimes you go to these events where you meet hundreds of people. So it reminds you how and when you met that person. And it does that for that other person.
Mhm.
But then you build these sort of connections, and I said at the beginning, you want to build authentic connections. It's not just quantity of people that you're connecting with. So when you make that connection, continuously follow them on social media. If they have a post or some article they post, comment on it. Again, authentically, you're curious. You want to know more about what they're speaking about. Ask questions. Be engaged. And again, like Krista said, that's just not during the time of need. That's an investment that you're doing in your career, in your network. And so that is a constant all year long. And like you said earlier as well, sometimes you get so tied up in your day to day, but carving out a time, whether it's 30 minutes a week or whatever it is, just be intentional about carving out that time and continuously working on that networking.
Mhm. Yeah, and the only other thing I'll add, and to build on what Catherine said, was um, once you're connected with them, and I think you can even do this when you're not connected, but like following their posts, right? Because then you're going to get notified every time they make a post and you can continue to engage with their LinkedIn content. So liking things, commenting on it. Maybe you see an article later on, or you see a podcast later on that reminds you of that conversation you had with them. Send it to them. Like, those are the little things that make people remember you. And then also, and this really depends on the context of how you met the person and what your conversation was with them. Um, Asking to hop on a video call, right? Like, hey, do you want to, like, a month later, do you want to touch base? Would love to pick your brain about XYZ, right? So it could be 15 minutes. But those are the people you're going to start to remember over time, especially if you were at an event and you just met several hundred people, right? So do that follow up, even just say like, hey, do you want to do a quick coffee chat in a few weeks? Would love to, see how XYZ is doing. I know you mentioned this at the conference, right? So
Mhm.
Catherine, loved your recommendation on actually putting in there how you met them or what the context was, because I forget those things all the time. So
Yeah.
love that little tip.
I learned my lesson a long time ago because I would come back from events and I'm like, wait, how did I meet them?
Yes.
So it's just really small things, but it works both ways, right? They'll remember you by, oh, you were the person that I bumped into while having coffee or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think my, as I mentioned, I was sort of iterating this document on like how to make the most of conferences. And one thing that I've realized is that when you go to one of these events, you're not going to remember any conversation. Like, just assume, even if you're having like the best time ever and you're like, I'll never forget this as long as I live, like, just assume it's out of your brain and write a note to yourself, whether it's an email or I lugged my iPad around the whole way. And if you can, yeah, if you can have a joke. There was a guy whose name is Philip, and my name is obviously Philip too. I go by Phil, and he says, "Oh, it's so good to meet another Phil that doesn't spell it with two L's. I hate it when people spell it with two L's." And I was like, "I spell it with two L's. I just have it as Phil, but with Philip and with two L's because that's my last name is Strazula. It's two L's too."
Mhm.
And that's just like a funny thing, right? Like, you write that down, you follow up. Hey, isn't that funny? And then maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever, you connect and there's something to be done there. And in the interim, to your guys' points, like, I think sharing relevant information that's helpful for people, just always in the back of your head, like, oh yeah, they used ADP and I just saw ADP did this thing or whatever. I'm going to send it to them, or asking them questions that honestly, like that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is just an unbelievable book. I think it was written in 1927 or something like that, but they should teach a whole college class on it. And it's really a lot of it, a little bit is about flattery, right? And saying like, I want your advice because you're smart. And here's an interesting question. I appreciate everybody who has held off on sharing their LinkedIn profile in the chat, because I know we're here to network. We're here to learn about networking. We're here to network as well. And so I'd love to sort of open up the networking power hour. If you want to connect with other folks in this conversation, feel free to drop your LinkedIn profile. Just drop mine in. And if you're dropping it in there, it's an open invitation to be connected with anybody else on the call. So please check your connections in the next day or so to connect with folks. And again, this is, it's really about lifting each other up, helping one another. It's not about I want to sell something to somebody or something like that. It's more just like I want to connect with other HR professionals who are going through the same struggles as I am, trying to figure out the same sort of problems and just support one another. So please take some time to do that now. And thanks everybody for being open to networking and sharing with everybody else here on the phone. I guess we've covered this a little bit, but I don't know if there is any last advice on how to make these sort of conversations more meaningful, less transactional, more authentic, whether that's online or offline or a combination thereof.
One thing I'll mention, so part of our Talent Collective community is we have mastermind groups. I mentioned earlier, we'll do, workshops that might be, smaller, more intimate, and there might be breakout rooms. Sometimes we'll do like, kind of speed dating, networking style calls and stuff like that. It's really tempting when you're at home behind a screen to have your email up, to have your little text message up, and to be getting all of those notifications and get super distracted and pulled away from the call. I would say like shut all of that down. Like there's zero point in trying to be in your email and network at the same time. You're basically wasting your time and wasting the other people's time on the call. I know a lot of people will join, workshops and stuff, and they'll be off camera, on mute the whole time, and kind of like barely listening in. I personally feel like that's kind of pointless, right? Like if you're gonna be at something, be there, be engaged, and be present, and shut all the rest of it down. And that's really how you're going to build meaningful, true connections with people is paying attention, right?
I would say that is true also with in-person events. I'll give an example. There was a person, I just came back from a European event. I will not name this person, but we were in an office, an open sales office in the event space. And there was a person that sat on her computer the entire time the event was taking place. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that there was some really important work that needed to be completed during those days. But for me, it seemed like, this person was not engaged, wasn't present. And so it seemed kind of a missed opportunity. You came to the event for reasons and you didn't take advantage of it. So I think that that definitely is something that's important online as well as in person.
I completely agree. And there are different ways around it and in different formats, but I'm such a believer in this whole like deep work movement. Cal Newport, the professor who's written a couple of books about it. And I was actually listening to something this morning about, Krista, to your point, the distractions of even having your phone powered off face down, but within your visual purview, it like decreases your IQ by like 15 points or something. Like it's crazy. And, we all live in a very distracted world. One thing that I'm actually doing now, and this is a format that works for me, is a lot of the one-on-one calls that I'm having, I'm actually doing them walking because I don't want to be at my computer where I'm going to get Slacks and emails And even if I'm on do not disturb, I'm sort of like out of the corner of my eye, like, oh, you know what I mean? Like I need to check that. And whereas if I'm out walking, it's like, hey, I'm 100% present here. And so that's something that I've recently taken as a best practice, whether it's one-on-one with a colleague or somebody who's I'm asking their advice or they're asking me for advice. I also it's interesting, Catherine, to your point. It's like, yeah, you're at this event, like what are you doing? You're on your computer. One thing that comes to mind for me, and perhaps is because I'm a bit of an introvert to begin with, and I usually go to these things alone. It can be kind of scary to get out there and put yourself out there and sort of like jump off the cliff. And I find that many people are basically either kind of staying with their swim buddy, the person that they came to the conference with, or when in doubt, like heads down because like I don't want basically it's like fear of rejection. And I instead of like talking to the four people that are sitting at this table around me and being like, hey, so where do where are you from and what do you do and whatever, I'd rather just like be on my phone and like pretend like that's really important. And I wonder if you have any advice for somebody who's like feeling that fear of rejection and just needs to jump off the cliff, like how do you build up that courage to say hello to the person next to you, even though you have no clue who they are, what they do, and you don't want to annoy them?
So for me, I think people who are introverts tend to be more comfortable in smaller groups. I may be wrong, but with some events, including mine, we offer things like roundtable discussions. We introduce something called think tanks where it's by topic and it's a small table of 8 people and you have sort of um, intimate discussions rather someone standing on stage and having a big lecture about something or a big networking event where there's hundreds of people around and you're having trouble navigating who to speak to. So my advice would be for those who are a little bit more introverted to gravitate towards that smaller peer-to-peer roundtable think tank type of discussions. Because I think you get a lot out of them. It's a peer-to-peer type of discussion. You're asking for advice, you're asking questions, you're trying to understand what other people are doing in the space, but it gives you a level of comfort. And like you said, sometimes you go to conferences alone. And I see a lot of people meeting each other in those roundtables. And so when they go to the networking event that has the hundreds of people, oh, so and so, you were sitting next to me at this roundtable. And it creates a level of comfort and allows you to sort of expand a little bit more in terms of your comfort zone. So look for those smaller type of events where you feel a little bit more comfortable. That would be my advice.
I think it's great advice. And what I try to tell myself is no matter kind of how you're feeling in that moment, you should just realize that you have something interesting and valuable to offer the conversation. And if one out of 10, you're going to get somebody who's being grumpy and maybe doesn't want to talk to you. But more times than not, people go to these conferences to network. And if you just happen to sit down, adjacent to somebody to have a cup of coffee, maybe check your email, maybe take a load off your feet, say hello. You just never know who you're going to talk to. And you're going to find really interesting people that appreciate that you said hello because a lot of people won't. Um, we're going to launch a poll in 2 seconds, just getting some feedback on this session. We're always trying to get better. We do these events quite frequently, and we always want to understand how to make it more impactful. Things like the networking, was that good? Was that bad? And then we will jump into some Q&A. We're also going to post the takeaways document here. You'll be getting it in an email, and we're actually going to update it as well with a couple of the things that we talked about today. And so I want to share that and know that we'll also be sending you takeaways doc plus recording, all that stuff in your email as well. So with that, I will also post that we do have 2 other webinars coming up. One is on DEI. We've got an awesome panel, kind of what's going on here. We're living in a world where things are changing quickly, executive orders, different compliance considerations, legal considerations, and be talking about that with a phenomenal panel. And then we're also going to be talking about fractional HR. We've done a couple of webinars about fractional. This is a new movement where people are working across companies, and we did some sort of the basics a week or two ago, and we're going to be diving into the more advanced stuff. How do I, get equity for my work in addition to cash compensation? How do I really build a fractional business as opposed to just having, maybe a side hustle or something like that? So a lot of really interesting stuff. Feel free to sign up through the links that I just shared in the chat. And with that, I'd love to get into the Q&A. We've got a bunch of questions that were submitted prior through your RSVPs. We'll try to rip through as many of those as we can. If you've got other questions, feel free to leave them in the Q&A or the chat. The one that's in the Q&A right now is hilariously from an anonymous attendee. And the question is basically, my employer doesn't allow us to do things on the internet, but I want to. And so is there basically a way to network while being anonymous? And I think it's hilarious because like you're kind of doing it a little bit right now. But yeah, how do you just, you've got an employer who maybe is a little bit old school, puts the fear into you. Are there ways of getting around this and still being able to build your network?
That's a hard question, honestly, being completely honest. I've never come across that. So I don't know that I have an answer to it, because a lot of the things that I do are in person. So it's hard to be anonymous when you're in person. But I think, this person is obviously anonymous online to ask that question. So I would say in similar fashion, don't disguise who you are. I mean, pretend that you're someone else. But I'm sure there are forums where you can ask questions like this and still get the response that you need, or ask questions that perhaps you can't do in front of the leadership or your company. So unfortunately, I don't know that I have a better answer than that, but Chriselle, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like just from the information we have, it sounds like the social media presence is the part that needs to stay anonymous, like maybe not having a LinkedIn profile or Facebook or something like that. So maybe I would say like go to Slack channels. You can still present as you yourself, and maybe just not represent the company in whatever forum you're in. And I would say focusing on in person rather than maybe virtual opportunities. Again, there's tons of communities like HR communities like Troop HR, very similar to Talent Collective, but more focused on HR, where you can join. You don't have to have a LinkedIn presence or social presence, and network that way.
Yeah, I would also say one-on-one DMs. You could be in a community where you see something interesting, and you don't have to voice your opinion publicly. You can
Yeah.
DM somebody and you can give advice, or you can ask for advice that way as well and set up, a call or something like that. I would imagine that in the vast majority of communities, probably like 5% or less of people are really the active posters, and there are many lurkers. And so you can lurk and build those relationships one-on-one. It would be my advice.
Yeah.
We covered a little bit this question around, SHRM sort of feels somewhat dated at times. Other reputable groups out there, we have a whole list of that people posted, and we'll try to summarize those in the takeaways doc as well. We also kind of covered this topic around networking for introverts and anxious achievers. I guess that I'm laughing because it basically is a good summary of myself. There's a really good book. I'll put it in the chat here it's called The Power of Quiet. And I think the first like 6 chapters are about introverts at Harvard Business School. And I actually found this book right before I matriculated at Harvard Business School. And so it was like super interesting for me to just learn, like, especially in the US, we sort of live in this world where introverts don't always get rewarded. And you should just, realize that you have a lot of power and how to play to those strengths. I wonder, we talked about a few pitfalls previously, but I wonder if there are any more that come up between the two of you all that are worth highlighting in terms of networking in person, online, etc., that folks on the call should know about? I think for I'll raise one, and I think that it was sort of inspired by a post on the chat that I won't call out specifically, but it was a bit commercial. And it was sort of like it was almost like you asked ChatGPT to write, some like spiffy post about like here's this game-changing information, subscribe here sort of thing. And I think that it doesn't come off as being very authentic versus a newsletter that I really like in the HR space is Talent Edge Weekly, which is written by CHRO. And it's basically just like, here's all the stuff that I learned that I think is interesting, et cetera. And I think through an authentic voice has built a really interesting audience versus, sign up for our newsletter and you're, I don't know, all your dreams will come true. It's just like it probably has like a similar goal in mind, but just a very different take that probably has much better end results.
Mm.
I don't know if anything else comes to mind that is worth highlighting as another pitfall.
Nothing we haven't said yet, and just for the sake of not being repetitive, I think there are a few things we touched on throughout, but nothing new in my mind.
Okay.
Agreed.
Here's an interesting question in today's day and age. I think the vast majority of, I think something like 30% of job seekers are using LLMs to mass apply to jobs, which basically means a job posting is opened and it's flooded with resumes. And so it's nearly impossible to get a job without networking, is basically the state of play. And maybe technology it's sort of a cat and mouse where like we need more friction now to apply. We almost need like the old school, like Taleo, like pain in the neck applications that took 30 minutes and you wanted to rip your hair out. Like something like that again, to combat these LLMs, which are applying for people's jobs while they sleep, right? With customized cover letters and everything. But in the interim, if you want to get a job, you kind of need to network your way in. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for how to do that at a company where you see a posting, you're like, I'm perfect for this job. This job's perfect for me. If I apply through the ATS, no one's even going to look at my resume. How do I get there? And maybe I should have started 3 years ago in building my network, but any advice for the here and now?
I've got quite a few things on this one because this is a big passion point of mine right now. The exact problem that you're describing, and actually one of my clients, who's a company I'm recruiting for, they've done exactly what you're saying, Phil. They've created, every single role. There's like an intense application process where like you have to essentially respond to usually 2 to 3 different they're almost like interview questions, but in application form. And like I'm the recruiter on the job, so I'm literally like reading through hundreds of these responses, and I can tell which one are ChatGPT responses, and I can tell which ones are authentic. But we ask things like, what's the mission, like why is the mission of our organization important to you, things like that. And then obviously job related ones too. But so that's on the recruiter's end, what we're doing to combat it. But to your point about networking specifically and how to, kind of get around the other thousands of people applying and their resumes being tailored to every single job, et cetera. Again, like this kind of goes back to where we started. You'd be surprised how few people actually reach out to the hiring manager. If it's a small organization, the founders of the company. I worked at a Series A startup for a couple of years, and almost every single time a candidate reached out to the founders with a thoughtful LinkedIn message or email, even if they were not perfect on paper, the founders were like, interview this person. So like, and you'd be surprised how few people actually do that. So taking that time to reach out to, whether it be the hiring manager, founders of the organization, maybe it's even the recruiter, obviously they're going to get hit up a bit more, but doing a little bit of research and doing a one-on-one, really authentic, heartfelt, this is why I'm passionate about this. Maybe I'm not perfect on paper, but here's why, I'd love to meet with you. Here's what I can contribute. I think it's shoot your shot.
I would say the same. I mean, for me, I could say the last 3 to 4 positions in my career have been obtained not through send a resume. It's typically been through what we've been talking about here, networking. And on some occasions when I was actively looking for an opportunity, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. So I would use LinkedIn, look up the company. And typically it was a company that I was very, like you said, passionate about and knew that I had the right skill set to take on that opportunity. And I would do a little research, find out what connections I have with this company, who can facilitate an introduction. It's almost like sales. I've been in a sales role for many times. So you're in essence creating a sales journey for yourself, and you're making those connections and those introductions for yourself. And so again, the power of networking. I mean, that's really what we've been talking about. So I think that's essential if you're looking for your next opportunity.
Totally agree. And it starts, ASAP and grows and grows and snowballs over time. And I think that as we think about the next evolution of especially white collar work, robots don't have networks. And if you want to continue to differentiate yourself, it's obviously, leveraging these AI tools and software, generally speaking, but it's also just developing this network of folks that you can rely on for insights, for help, for your next career move. And I think this is, yeah, just a topic that I think is super essential. And I wanted to thank both of you for joining us, for sharing your insights, everybody on the phone for sharing your questions, your insights, what groups you're a part of, what's working, what's not, your LinkedIn profiles and networking with one another. I really enjoyed it, and I hope to see everybody in a future webinar. And best of luck to everybody out there networking. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.